Hey everybody, we have a quick chat about the Get Buff sequel of books, and it is a genuine sequel. I'm about to release the fifth in the sequel, the fifth volume. So the first Get Buff came out in 1999, and that was in part encouraged by the crew at T-Mag. I was writing for them at the time, and well received content, programs, etc. Many programs became iconic, and the Get Buff one was produced in 99. Originally, it had a pink cover, but more in a more recent cover version, we were not, shortly after we went to the colors that you see behind me. So, did anyone here Get Buff One as their first Get Buff book?
Yep.
Yep.
So, Tom, what year did you get that?
It would have been like 2014, 2013, something like that.
Okay, okay. So, some 15 years after its release. So, at the time you saw it, was it well, we'll put it this way: when it came out in '99, it contained content that no one was doing, no one knew about it. The speed of movement, integrating bodyweight exercises, unique single leg unilateral bodyweight exercises, many things like that that I developed over the prior 20 years. And keep in mind that Get Buff One was released in my 20th year of coaching. But 15 years later, Tom, was it all more familiar then, or was it still did you still find it fairly unique and new?
Yeah, I still found it to be unique and new. I was training myself in the late 90s. I was starting to learn to do that, and I was just reading like muscle magazines and stuff. But I didn't know about T-Mag website. I was just in high school. Um, I thought it was awesome, but it was definitely new. Just I remember one of the things just doing less sets, for example. But the exercises, the descriptions, I loved it.
Yeah, excellent. So that was the first comment, and then Get Buff Two I released 3 years later, so 2002. It was titled Get More Buff. Then it was the next step up in program complexity. So started to add a little bit more of the powerlifts and Olympic lifts to the earlier programs, which obviously had some in Olympic and powerlifts in it, but I started to expand it a little bit more and more advanced, shall we say. Um, I'm hoping everyone started with Get Buff One because that's certainly my hope. Get Buff One is a program that I believe, or has programs that I believe that you should be revisiting on an annual basis, but Get Buff Two is the next step up. So, who got their hands on Get Buff 2 after that?
I
Yep.
did.
David. So, what year did you get Buff 1 and what year did you get Buff 2?
Get Buffed One must be around 2008, maybe, or 2009. And just like Tom, I was at the end of the 80s. I wasn't aware of Get Buffed. I wasn't aware of T-Mag, etc. But I was reading all the typical bodybuilding magazines like Flex Magazine, Muscle and Fitness, etc. Was doing their programs actually, and like after a few weeks, I was like crashing. And it just didn't work for me, all those programs from all those muscle magazines. I couldn't understand why. I thought something was wrong with me. And when I bought Get Buffed and when I read that book, then everything made sense. Everything made sense. Now I finally understood why those programs weren't working and why Get Buffed, the Get Buffed program was working so well for me. So that was huge. And then that's why I decided to continue my KSI journey and buy and bought after Get Buffed one. I started to buy everything else like Get Buffed 2 and the videos and all the DVDs. So yeah, that was
Yeah, that's a great story, and I do remember that. So, my early professional years, there was very little material around. I didn't get a lot of guidance. I had to innovate, and the athletes, at least in Australia in the 80s, did not do strength training. Most sports thought strength training was bad, and that was similar in America in the 60s and the 70s. So I was actually in the first challenge having to introduce them to strength training. But as we got into the late 80s and the early 90s, the next challenge was trying to keep the volume under control under the influences of the bodybuilding magazines. So the athletes that I've trained predominantly are drug-free. And when I say predominantly, I mean overwhelmingly predominantly involved in drug-tested sports, independently drug-tested sports, which makes it a little bit unique. And I'm talking about predominantly Olympic level. Um, so it was important that we were able to get results, get big, strong, and lean without relying on the vitamin programs that everyone thought it was just the state-sponsored communist countries that were engaging in, when they definitely were, in my opinion, but it wasn't just them. So the Get Buff programs were born out of being effective and without drugs, and having to compete with athletes that were supported by the vitamin programs I spoke about. So I think that's one of the many things that made the Get Buff range unique, is that I understood drug-free training, and the volume was so much lower because it just wasn't going to work otherwise. Victor, did you say you got your hands on Get Buff 3?
Yes, but it's such a long time ago, I cannot actually remember. But I definitely got one and two together, sometime in the early 2010s, and then get buff three and four shortly. And but I actually didn't get to utilize the content only after quite a few years, because I was like, okay, with Get Buff 1 and then with Get Buff 2, there were so many things in it. I read Get Buff 3, I'm like, okay, I definitely am not ready for this. And I knew, and instinctively I knew that, okay, yeah, there's really a lot of things that you have to nail first before you can get to those programs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a pretty smart decision. Get Buff 3 was released in 2004, so it's 99, 2002, 2004 for Get Totally Buffed, but it was 2007 for Get Seriously Buffed. Get Buff 4, released in 2007, was definitely an advanced program. So I'd imagine some of you got Get Buff 4, the book, but I wouldn't necessarily expect many of you to have done the programs in there because they were pretty advanced. Can anyone relate to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I never did the program of Get Buff 4, but the content was great. But just like Victor said, even with Get Buff 3, but definitely the number 4 was the programs were like very high level.
Absolutely. And so Get Buff 1, 1999, Get Buff 2, 2002, Get Buff 3, 2004, Get Buff 4, 2007. So four books released in those 9-year period. But there are two parts of the book. There's content and then the program. And even though the programs may have got out of the reach of some, there was always a content. And the content was generally intended to be build on the previous volume. So you would not have found any repetition between Get Buff 1 and Get Buff 4 other than maybe an exercise description. But as far as the content, you would have noticed that it was unique and it was building on. And that's why I believe it's the only genuine sequel in the genre, in the book genre, where the content generally builds from volume to volume to volume. So I think some of you mentioned that even though the programs might have been out of your reach, the content would have been valuable for you. And that's what I want people to have. I want people to have that content, even if the programs are for the moment beyond them. Anyone want to comment on the way the content builds upon the previous volumes?
Yeah, I mean, a simple one is the first one doesn't have abs, but I like it because that's one of the things about KSI is it's not just like try to impress everybody with like massive amounts of info. It's like where's the client at? And I experience that with training people nowadays all the time where I sometimes I in my mind I'm like, okay, this is we could do all this stuff that would help them and then that but that's not really where they're at. Even to absorb it, they are overwhelmed by just a little bit. So it's phenomenal.
So I had to make a tough decision in 99. The exercises that were in the programs were so radical at the time. They were so industry disruptive. I mean, they were really, really. I mean, it's hard to imagine now. In the now that everybody's embraced them or imitations of them. But in that era, people thought I was crazy because the first stage of the program had no external load in it. It was just bodyweight exercises, and people thought, well, you're crazy. So I was very conscious of not trying to blow people out of the water and Get Buff 1 by saying, okay, in addition to all these crazy, unique lower body exercises that I've come up with that just didn't exist before, and I'm expecting you to do them. I was I didn't feel comfortable saying, okay, and by the way, I've got these control drills that I've innovated as well. So this is how you do them. And by the way, I've got all these abdominal exercises, and I want you to do them at the start of the workout. I felt it was just too much. So I made a tough call and just released the strength training component only. Now, looking at it back what are we now, 27 years later, everyone could say, well, I know all those exercises now, so you didn't need to do that. And I know all about this, speed timing, and everybody's a little bit more knowledgeable than they were back then. But the reality was, had I put everything in Get Buff One, I think it would have alienated too many people because the programs themselves were very disruptive. And I watched the way the editor at the time at TMAG wrote, trying to encourage people to give the programs a go, even though there was no body weight, no external load in the exercises. And I also noted how people responded to me when I did seminar tours. Um, I wasn't very popular when people found out that what I was teaching in the seminar wasn't what the local guru, were doing. And I had a few, fairly significant moments, shall we say, one in Boston and one in New York in particular, where it was very obvious that what I was teaching was just too disruptive to the local gurus, and they had to go back to the drawing boards and shoot it down in the short term until they worked out how to deliver their own equivalent. So that's the first rule books, and that with Get Bar 5 about to be released, it maintains the concept that it's building upon the information, but there is one slight difference with Get Bar 5 in that I believe it can be overlaid, all the information can be overlaid across the previous 4 volumes. So I believe that Get Bar 5 is genuinely for everybody. And it can be applicable no matter what stage of your journey you're at. So obviously I'm talking about something that hasn't come out, but it's coming out 27 years after Get Bar 1 and 47 years after I started my coaching journey. So I'm pretty pleased with the continuity that's been shown through the Get Buff range. It took me 20 years before I released Get Buff 1. So started in 1980, didn't release it until 1999, which is my 20th year. It was 20 years of learning that went into that book, and there were some pretty unique learnings. And then another 27 years since. So Get Buff 5 contains the last 47 years of wisdom, and it's not the end of the series. Get Buff 5, we're not stopping there. And I'll repeat it again, it is the only genuine sequel of information for people who want to get bigger, stronger, leaner available. And I don't, as I speak boastfully about that, I don't do that to denigrate some of the legendary books that have come before me, including Bill Pearl's Keys to the Universe. Bill was a very significant figure in the industry, and I have a lot of appreciation of what he did. The book was phenomenal. I did disrupt his categorization of exercises. For example, he did call the lower body just the legs, and I break the legs into 2, the hip dominant, quad dominant. But that was not out of disrespect. That was just out of attempt to advance it. And I know he and others from that era appreciate Bill's passed now, and so is Dave Draper. Dave Draper was very complimentary about my work, and I appreciate the support. I didn't get direct involvement with Reg Park, but I did with his son. So I have a lot of appreciation of the writings that came before me. I learned a lot from them. But for whatever reason, and maybe we just have more access to information now, but that aside, it's still the only 5 book. It will be the only 5 book sequel in the market. And by the time we finished, it'll be even a more significant range than that. If anyone's got any final comments about the whole book range before we wrap.
Yeah, I like how on that note, you start with Get Buff 1, just teaching people basic concepts about how to approach training. Like you need to recover from training. You can't just train as much as you want and think that it's just going to work out the more you do. And I can relate to that because before I knew about you, I would sometimes do like 2-hour strength workouts and literally feel like I had the flu afterward because I was so crushed. And I just, when I look back, I'm like, dang, it's so much more effective that I could have accomplished so much more at a younger age. And I wouldn't, without having to really work so hard at something that wasn't working. And then starting off Get Buff 5, because I'm starting to read it, it's advanced those concepts. Now you can learn a little bit deeper aspect of how that all applies and why and that kind of thing.
So just to be transparent, some of the coaches in this group are in my editing group. They get to read the draft, the manuscript. So they've got a bit of a heads up, bit of an insight in what's in the Get Buff 5. So I appreciate those words, Tom, and I certainly know what you're talking about overtraining. I did all the things that you would have done at the start, and I wanted to advance. I had to find out better solutions, and I guess I probably wasn't as exposed to the bodybuilding magazines in my earlier informative days as you were. I didn't see a bodybuilding magazine until I was in my mid-teens, and I never had a subscription. I just saw a few pictures of Franco and Arnold in a sort of a more of an adult, just a general magazine. They just happen to have a piece on them in there, but I don't think I ever got my hands on a bodybuilding magazine per se, and until I was probably into my early 20s, and it was as much Iron Man as anything else. And um, you know, the readers were very different in the way they produced Iron Man back in the day. It wasn't the glossy bullshit that the 1980s bodybuilding magazines turned into. So I probably missed a little bit of that influence, but nevertheless, I had to learn and the hard way and pass on those lessons to anyone else. So I appreciate that, Tom. Anyone got any thoughts before we wrap?
Yeah, I see a fitness craze nowadays. Everyone, all the young people are doing fitness training, and so much bullshit on the market. And I'm very happy to see that there is again some wisdom, and that is a trade Get Buffed 5. A lot of wisdom how to stay injury free, for example. I haven't read the whole book yet. It's so much, but from what I've read so far, it's everyone has to read this book. Everyone has to read Get Buffed, and I can only hope that the young people will read it too. But I'm very happy that I can at least that I can guide my own daughter, who is 20 years old and who is also a part of the fitness craze, so to speak. But she is doing the programs that are PSI programs, so I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, appreciate that, Dave. And that's a reality. I'm glad you brought that up. That when I started in 1980 professionally, the gym wasn't very crowded. The athletes weren't doing strength training. If they were only using light weights and doing high reps. That was what they were told to do. So it wasn't a very crowded environment. You were considered pretty weird, definitely back in the 70s if you did strength training, and back in the 60s. And now it's everybody's doing it. So if there's any flaws in program design, we're getting more side effects. More people are getting side effects. Um, so it's been interesting for me to observe an industry that had a lot of challenges in program design back in the 80s, and now that's been magnified. It's just got massive the problems because of the numbers doing it. And again, we're not exactly we haven't learned a lot. I made a big effort in Get Buff One to educate around the lines of movement concept that I developed in the 1980s, which was hip dominant, quad dominant, upper body push pull, vertical, horizontal, etc., and balance around the joints and joint health, etc. But those lessons weren't really absorbed by the world. Some of the flashy stuff was, but the actual joint health concepts haven't really been absorbed, which is why I think Get Buff 5 is very pertinent to today's times when young people coming through, and as young people do, they want to find out for themselves. They don't really want to learn from the wisdom of those who've gone before them sometimes, but it's there for them if they ever want to get an outcome in it. And not only has strength training gone down through the age groups, but it's gone across the gender borders. Um, and I spend a lot of time with athletes and young athletes coming through. When I started training elite athletes in the early 1980s, they were what I call clean skin. They'd never done strength training before, so their body was a byproduct of their sport. Now I'm looking at young athletes, and their body's a byproduct of their dryland training, of their strength training, more so than it is of their sport. And I'm seeing the imbalances of the visual. I can visually see the imbalances, which were the very imbalances that in 1980 I made a commitment to avoid and prevent. In particular, the quads, like the quad development on the younger generation of athletes, and gym goes is great. You've buffed up your quads, but what are those little things behind you, and what are the implications of not having anything behind? And it's more than just visual. And that's just one joint or two joints, the knee and the hip. There are more joints and more exercises. So, David, yes, it's pretty tough to watch. And when I thought, but 40, 50 years ago, I thought I'd come up with some solutions, but they haven't really been embraced, and that's normal. We're not rushing to find optimal. We're just rushing to sell equipment. And that's the chapter in the book explaining that theory. Now, I appreciate that, Dave. Well, we'll wrap it at that. I thank everyone for their input into the sequel. As I go again, after 20 years, Get Buff 1 was released in 1999. Get Buff 2, 2002. Get Buff 3, 2004. Get Buff 4, 2007. And now 47 years after I started my journey, I'm about to release Get Buff 5. So looking forward to putting it in everybody's hands.